Hello everybody, my name is Murray and welcome to this really easy acrylic painting tutorial for beginners of an underwater scene. We're going to use titanium white, turquoise. To get the lighter shade of turquoise, all you do is mix turquoise and white. We're going to have phthalo blue, yellow ochre, which if you haven't got at home is just yellow and purple to make a mustard colour, and burnt umber brown. The brushes I use were just a small thin brush just for fine detail. A flat brush, which is really useful for painting waves. I've got a little round headed brush which I use for blending. I've got a larger round headed brush again for blending and blocking in, and then I've got a big sort of house painting brush which I use for just sort of smoothing areas, and I've got a throwaway palette which is really useful because you don't have to clean. So I've got a nice canvas that I've just prepped, and I'm just going to get some white and I'm just going to put it in the top corner with my big blender brush. I've got this dark turquoise, and all I'm going to do is just go around the white. The white should mix with it and it should create the lighter shade of turquoise, and I'm just going to come down from that corner. We're going to have the light shining down from the right hand corner, so we're going to get a little bit darker. So we're going to mix phthalo blue and turquoise together to get a lovely sort of royal cerulean blue sort of color. And then all we're going to do is just create a block here. Now as you can see, the colors, there's a big jump in colors, and we don't want that. For realism, we want to blend that together. So all I'm going to do is just get some turquoise, watch, and just go over the top and just makes not such a jump in color. So by just adding more turquoise to the mix, we can just sort of blend it together. So I'm just going to go over it, just so as water gets deeper, it gets darker in colour, hence the phthalo blue. So all I'm going to do is get some turquoise and white, and I'm just going to blend the first line just here. I'm just going to come down and just gradually blend. I'm just using a big blender brush, which is just a soft bristle brush. It's not expensive or anything, you don't need to buy a particular make. And we're just blending it into that darker blue shade as we come down, just to represent deeper water in the ocean. So look, it should be nice and bright in that top right hand corner. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to roughly get some of the darker shade, which is turquoise and phthalo blue, and just make it kind of a straight line, just so all this section is kind of the same color. So there we go. Now as you get deep into the ocean, it gets very dark because obviously it's so deep. So we're just going to get some phthalo blue and we're going to add it to our turquoise. So we've got much more phthalo blue, sort of 80% phthalo blue and about 20% turquoise. And all we're going to do, we're just going to do a big line across our painting, kind of in the middle. And we're just going to create where the ocean and the sand kind of meets and you get that deep water. Now, as I say, with realism, half of creating realistic work is just making the transitions smoother. So blending is incredibly important. So look, all I'm doing is I'm just getting some turquoise and I'm just gently blending these two colors together so you don't notice the change in color. Now as we come down, we're going to do the same like a mirror with the ocean floor. So all we're going to do, we're going to get some turquoise and we're just going to go along that line and just gradually again blend it into that dark phthalo blue. And this is kind of going to be the sand that is sort of receding off into the distance. So it's really, really dark and it looks like it's fading away towards the ocean. And then we're just going to get some of that phthalo blue, look, and just mix it together. So take your time. We just don't want any big jumps in colour. And then as we get deeper, we're going to get darker. So we're going to introduce burnt umber brown and turquoise. And this should kind of make a sort of turquoisey grey colour. And we're going to frame our painting by painting right at the bottom of our painting in this dark colour. So this is all the area of the ocean floor that's not getting much sunlight. It's far away from the light source in the top right. So it's nice and dark. But again, there's a big jump in colour. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back to our turquoise and add a little bit more to the mix so it's a bit lighter. And all we're going to do, we're just going to link these two areas together and blend them. So there we go, look, we're just linking these two areas. I'm just pushing down softly with my brush, going back and forth. I'm just adding a little bit of water each time, just so my brush is nice and moist. But I don't want too much water to make it really streaky. You can see I wear scruffy clothes when I'm painting, and I just wipe it on my clothes. You can use a bit of kitchen roll just to take some of the dampness out of the brush, some of the moisture. And then look, I'm just gradually blending it to that turquoise, and it should, in literally, we spent about 3-4 minutes, we've got this lovely dark sort of mirror effect where we've got the light coming from the right and the dark at the bottom. So I've got this big blender brush, and we're going to swap to a flat brush, and we're going to paint some waves. So we're going to get some of our turquoise and phthalo blue. So with turquoise and phthalo blue, we're going to load up our brush. We're going to just wipe most of it away so we don't get a huge clunk of paint. And just gently, with a bit of finesse, we're just going to create some lines. So we're just moving across the painting. And the great thing about a flat brush, they're really easy to create straight lines because the bristles are flat. So we're just kind of creating like scoop shapes, little scoops. And these are going to represent waves towards the top of the water where the light is coming through. So look, all we're doing, we're just creating these waves. Really, really easy. Just take your time at home. Really, really easy. And we're just letting that paint sort of run out as it sort of fades out at the bottom. And then we're going to get our big house brush, which is nice and clean and soft. And we're just going to go back and forth. So think of Bob Ross, where he used to whack the devil out of his brush when he cleaned it. We're kind of just smoothing areas across. Now, I didn't let my painting dry, look, and I scraped a bit. But don't worry, it kind of looks cool. We can put that into the painting. So don't worry. And then we're going to get some brown. And we're just going to add it to our turquoise to create a very dark shade. We're going to add some phthalo blue and some turquoise to make it even darker. And all we're going to do, just like we did with our flat brush, we're just going to create some texture on the ocean bottom, so on the sand. And these are all the bits and bobs of the sand where it has sort of ripples and texture in the sand. And all I'm doing, I'm letting the paint kind of run off my brush. So now there's kind of hardly any paint left. And as it runs out, and I've got hardly any paint, look, I can just smooth it out so it looks nice and subtle. It's not too dark. I don't want to have loads of paint on my brush. And I can kind of just use the chalky aftermath of the paint, the only bits that are left on my brush, and kind of let it fade out into the distance. So you can have really subtle sort of impressions of texture that are barely noticeable. And then we can get our big brush, look, and just go over the top. And it kind of looks like these sort of texture on the sand is sort of fading off into the distance. So look, our work's becoming really 3D in like a couple of minutes. And then please dry your painting with a hairdryer, because I'm going to teach you a really easy beginner's technique that you might not know about in tutorials. We're going to get a dry brush, and this is just a blender brush, just a round-headed blender brush. We're going to wipe away 90% of the paint. And all I'm doing, I've got a bit of turquoise. I'm just going over the dry canvas of those waves that we just painted. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because it softens those waves because they're quite dark. And by just having a little bit of the sea colour, the turquoise, I can just glaze over the top of them. And you can still see them, look, but they're not as harsh. So they're still there, but they look much more faded and realistic. But this only works on a dry canvas. So if you try to do it on wet paint, everything will smudge together. So that's why I'm saying just dry it. So can you see the left-hand side? Look, it's a lot darker than the right-hand side. But look, I can just go over the top. I've got barely any paint on my brush, and I can just glaze it. Now I'm going to get some white and turquoise. And all I'm going to do with my dry brush, I'm going to do the exact same thing around our sunlight peeking through the waves. So this really nice sort of pastel turquoise, I can glaze this area. And as I say, the brush is completely dry. I haven't dipped it in any water. All I'm doing is just getting a tiny bit of paint, and I can just colour the dry canvas to my liking and just make this area nice and soft and pastel. And it just looks like the sunlight peeking through. But again, it's so easy to do. This technique is called glazing, if you wanted to look it up. And as I say, a lot of people don't necessarily tell you how to do this. So lots of the step-by-step instructions, but I just spend a little bit more time being a bit more patient, not rushing through it. You can sort of find out these techniques. So I'm just going to colour in this area just quickly. And then I'm going to swap to a smaller brush and I'm going to teach you how to paint light reflection on the sand. So let's mix some white and turquoise to make a really pastel white and turquoise colour. We've got a really thin small brush, and all we're going to do, we're going to kind of wipe away most of the paint so we don't have too much thick paint. We're going to create sort of zigzag sort of shapes, look like a zigzag. And these are going to be the light sort of reflecting when it comes through the waves on the sand below. So I like to kind of make sort of wonky circles that are kind of interlinked. So I kind of create these zigzag shapes and I make them into sort of wonky circles. That kind of makes sense. So I link them up, look, I link them up. So think of like a chain link fence or something like that. We just want to create these wonky circles and sort of link them up. Now as they go further into the distance, I'm making these circles much closer together and more flat. So as they come down, I'm just making them a bit wider, a bit more further apart. And again, that just kind of adds to the perception and the perspective of the painting. So again, just create some of the realism, but it's all in the same colour. So look, just link your zigzags, make them kind of bigger at the bottom. And as we go up towards that middle bit, I'm just making them more flat. So look, as we come up, they're getting closer together and they're almost look on top of each other now when they go off. And look, if you put too much paint, look, if you didn't dip your paint and it comes out really thick, don't worry, because we're going to smooth it out in a minute and make it look more subtle. So look, we're just going to have them fading out and it should look much more 3D in literally 30 seconds. So this painting literally takes 20 minutes to paint, half an hour. But as I say, you can go at your own speed. If you find it too fast, you can slow it down, pause the video. If you find it too easy, you can always fast forward it. So let's just link this area and finish it. So there we go. So it's kind of cool. So we're going to get our big brush and we're just going to smooth it out. So we're just going to gradually go over it, and the soft bristles shouldn't smudge it or anything. But again, it just makes it more faded and out of focus to give that sort of water effect. And then all we're going to do with our dry clean brush, we're going to wipe away some turquoise. We just got turquoise, just like we did at the top. And we're just going to glaze where the ocean and the sand kind of meets, the horizon. And we're just going to glaze it. And what that should do, just like we did with our waves, it should push it back. And it should make it look like it's fading off into the distance. See how that works? Sometimes my camera goes a bit out of focus because I think because it works so well, the camera thinks it's off into the distance and struggles to focus. So let's get some yellow ochre and some white. If you haven't got yellow ochre, you can add yellow and purple and it will give you the same sort of mustard colour, which is yellow ochre. So yellow ochre and white to create sort of this muted sort of pastel colour. We've still got our small brush. Now all I would like you to do is create zigzags just like you've done, but not on top of the exact same lines you just did. Try to do them around each other. So you've got the sort of turquoise ones underneath that you can still see, and then you have your yellowy pastel white ones over the top. So don't go directly on top of the lines, kind of go around them. And what this does is it looks like some of the waves are really sharp, these ripples and this light, and other ones are a bit more in the shade, and you get this nice complement. Kind of looks like spaghetti. So just go around it, and it should look like some areas are in the sunlight and some are more in the shade. You've got this nice complement of yin and yang, hots and colds. And then again, look, just with our brush, we're just going to smooth it over, just so it doesn't look so harsh. It adds to the realism. And then we're just going to get our turquoise, exactly the same. Look, wipe away 90% of the paint and just glaze over the top. And then what it should do, you should still see your yellow highlights, but they should be much more subtle and much more realistic now. Now we're going to paint some rocks now, so we're going to get some phthalo blue and some burnt umber brown to create a really dark shadow colour. So phthalo blue and burnt umber brown. We're going to add a little bit of yellow ochre just to neutralise it. Now if you want, you can always dry your painting first before you commit to painting a rock. And if you dry it and you make a mistake, you can always just wipe away the rock with a baby wipe. But I'm feeling confident, and I'm confident in your ability at home. So let's just block this in. So all we're doing, look, we're just creating an outline and we're blocking it in. I'm going to put one right in the corner, because then when I sign my signature, it can stand out because there's a nice dark colour. And let's have two little ones. The other way to do it is you can always use chalk at home to draw something out before you commit to it and paint. Chalk is a great way to do that. So let's get some phthalo blue and turquoise. So again, just some phthalo blue and turquoise. And then what we're going to do is just around our rocks, we're just going to wipe most of the paint off. We're just going to create a sort of glow. And this is going to be the shadow where you get this lovely sort of shade where the rocks sort of silhouette is kind of glowing around them in the ocean water. So we're just going to create that sort of hum around our rocks. And then while I've got this colour, I love Bob Ross, and he used to come up with great techniques and different ways to do it. And one of the things he would say in painting is always darken up your corners, because it gets people to look towards the middle. So I'm just adding a little bit of blue in that corner because we've got a rock in the other corner. And then with a clean dry brush, all I'm just going to do is just smooth out these shadows. Just so again, they're kind of out of focus and they look really subtle. So look, I'm just smoothing them out just so they're nice and soft. Well, hey, now please dry your work with a hairdryer, because we're going to do the sunbeams. So take your work away, dry it with a hairdryer before you commit to this. We're going to get a clean white brush. So we just got white paint on our brush. We've wiped away 90% of the paint on my sleeve. And just like the glazing technique, we've got a dry canvas because it's dry, and a dry brush and hardly any paint. And look, you get this nice white chalky residue. Now if you've got a dry canvas, if you make a mistake, you can just wipe these sunbeams away with a baby wipe and your lovely painting will still be underneath. But look, I've got hardly any paint. Look, and we can just glaze it with white. And it just, this chalky residue just comes out. And if you want to brighten areas, you just go over it twice. And if you just want them really nice and subtle, you just do it the once. Look. So look at that. So look, I can get thick paint now that they've put in, and I can always brighten them. I can use my flat brush to create white, shiny waves. So these are the waves that are getting really lots of sunlight. Now, if you'd like to learn how to paint realistic water, we have this tutorial, which is how to paint this scene in under 10 minutes, which teaches you about shimmer on water and how to paint waves, which is really helpful. I'm just going to go over the top with my big brush just to soften it again. Yes, that's a really helpful video. And then we've actually got how to paint realistic water and waves actually as a playlist, which has about 50 videos on how to paint water. So if you'd like to binge away on that, if you go to the channel, there's plenty. So don't forget to like and subscribe. So what I'm doing, I'm just getting some turquoise and white just to soften up this area, just to create the glow effect. We've got our lovely white ripples now. All I did was just use white. Look, if you paint something over, you can just go over them. The key to acrylics, especially the whitest whites, is to go over them twice. You can always dry your painting and look, go over it with a second layer of paint. Now we've got these sunbeams in, we can get some turquoise and white, and we can create some brighter highlights on our ocean floor. And all we're going to do, look, we're going to create our spaghetti zigzags again, but now with just turquoise and white, and we're just going to do it directly under these light beams. And all this is the areas of the sand that are getting highlighted by the sunlight. So just using this really bright pastel highlight and a thin brush, it's so much easier to do with a thin brush. But if you find that they are too bright, like mine look a bit too bright, you can just get your big brush and let's soften them up again. And we can always get our dry blender brush and a little bit of turquoise just to push them back into the distance. So don't be afraid to just go over them, and they'll still be there, look, but they're just more subtle and lovely. And then what we can do, just to add an extra detail, a bit of realism, we can get some yellow ochre and some phthalo blue to create a nice greeny colour. So yellow ochre and phthalo blue. We go back to a smaller brush, and look, we can just put some highlights on our rocks, and these are just bits of the rocks to give it a bit of texture to make them look more 3D. And it's just where the sunlight is just hitting these parts of the rock to make them look more realistic. So a lovely little detail. And then lastly, if we get our thin brush again, we can mix a little bit of turquoise and white into that mix. Use again a really thin brush, so it's so much easier to do fine detail. And look, we can just put some of our zigzags onto our rocks, and this just represents the light shining down and reflecting on them. So just take your time at home, enjoy it. A lot of these techniques, as I say, from watching the longer tutorials, you can actually find out how to use brushes to your advantage and how to make your paints pop. And look, just by giving my whites a second coat of white, now it's dry, it makes it so much more vibrant. That's how I get that glow effect, by just adding 2 coats of paint. So I'm really happy with her. I've signed her and put her on a nice easel. So we've got this lovely blended background where you've learned how to do the waves and soften them with a blender brush, how to push that back with the turquoise, how to paint the sand and the light effect, how to have the glow and sunbeams coming into your ocean, and then how to paint rocks with a lovely 3D effect and nice shadow. So don't forget to check out all the other videos with the how to paint water playlist. We've got how to paint waves, how to paint beaches, lots of helpful step-by-step tutorials for beginners that are waiting to be watched. And don't forget to like and subscribe and to tag me with your versions of the tutorials at mstewartpaintings on social media. So happy painting everyone, take care, and we'll see you soon. Bye.